Hello friends, today I am taking up a new subject, Law of Contract under Indian Contract Act 1872. So friends, I have selected some important questions with answers for preparation of university exams. These questions have been given in very simple format and short form because we cannot explain everything through a video. So wherever required, you may elaborate the answers. Now let me continue. Question number 1. An agreement enforceable by law is a contract. Comment with the help of relevant illustration. So answer to this question will be, according to section 2H of the Indian Contract Act 1872, an agreement enforceable by law is a contract. What section 2H says? An agreement enforceable by law is a contract. For example, if A agrees to sell his car to B for 2 lakhs and B accepts, this is a valid contract since it fulfills essential conditions like offer, acceptance, consideration and legal enforceability. However, if A agrees to sell liquor in a state where it is prohibited, the agreement is void as it is not enforceable by law. So, your agreement must be enforceable by law. Question number 2. Define an offer and the essential elements of a valid offer. What is the difference between an offer and an invitation to offer? Now, the answer will be under section 2A of the Indian Contract Act 1872, an offer is a proposal made with the intention to create legal relations. Once accepted, it becomes a promise under section 2B as per Indian Contract Act 1872. Now, what are the essential elements of a valid offer? The Indian Contract Act 1872 specifies that it must be communicated to the offeree, must show intention to create legal relations. Third, terms must be clear and definite. Fourth, can be expressed or implied. And last, it must be lawful and not an invitation to offer. Now, what is an invitation to offer? An invitation to offer is not actually defined in the Act but recognized in case law. It merely invites others to make offers without binding effect. But there is no binding. That is, only an invitation is made. So, example, goods displayed in a shop are an invitation. When a buyer proposes to purchase, then it becomes an offer. Acceptance creates a contract. Question number 3. Every agreement of which the object or consideration is unlawful is void. Discuss as per the Indian Contract Act 1872. The answer will be, every agreement whose object or consideration is unlawful is void as given under section 23 of the Indian Contract Act 1872. An unlawful object includes acts forbidden by law, immoral acts, or acts against public policy. Such agreements have no legal effect and cannot be enforced by courts. Even if a part of the consideration is unlawful, the entire agreement becomes void unless separable. Now there is a relevant case in this law, Susila Devi versus Harise, Supreme Court Judgment 1971. The court ruled that an agreement based on unlawful consideration is void, where transfer of property was without lawful authority. Now question 4. What do you understand by quasi-contracts? Discuss. Answer will be, quasi-contract is a situation when there is no actual contract between the parties, but a legal obligation is imposed by the court so that no party can take undue advantage. It is recognized under Section 68 to 72 of the Indian Contract Act 1872. It is based on the principle of justice and equity. Section 68. Compensation for supplying necessaries to an incapable person, such as minor. Section 69 says right of reimbursement for a person who pays on behalf of another. Section 70 says obligation to pay for benefits received for work or services without a contract. Section 71, the custodian of lost good holds responsibility similar to the owner. He is just like a owner. Section 72, money or goods received by mistake or under coercion must be returned. So what is the purpose of this quasi-contract? To prevent unjust advantage. Example, if a shopkeeper supplies food to a minor, the cost can be recovered from the minor's property. What the Section 68 of Indian Contract Act says? If a person mistakenly gives money to another, so that money must be returned to the person. Section 72 says so. Now question 5. What are the essentials of a valid contract? Explain with the leading case law. Under Section 10 of the Indian Contract Act 1872 requires the following essentials for a valid contract. Number 1, offer. Second is acceptance. Third, lawful consideration. Fourth is capacity to contract. Fifth is free consent, lawful object, and certainty for a valid contract. Leading case in this case, the Carlyle versus Carbolic Smoke Ball Company case, 1892-1893. This was a leading case. In this case, the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company advertised that their product, the Carbolic Smoke Ball, would prevent users from contracting influenza. The advertisement promised a pound 100 reward to $100 reward to anyone who used the smoke ball as directed and still contracted the flu. Mrs. Carlyle purchased the smoke ball, used it according to the instruction, but fell sick and from influenza. She claimed reward, 100 as a reward, but the company refused to pay, arguing that the advertisement was not a binding offer and that no contract had been formed. The Court of Appeal held that the advertisement was a legitimate offer to the world, accepted by performing the conditions using the smoke ball. The company had to pay her $100. This case shows how advertisements can be binding offers if conditions are clear and followed. Now question 6. Explain free consent with an important case law, including facts. Section 14 of Indian Contract Act 1872 defines free consent as consent obtained without coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake. Leading case in this law, Rani Annapurni versus Swaminath, 1925. The plaintiff was a widow who transferred property to her son under undue influence by her adopted daughter-in-law. The court held the contract voidable as the consent was not free but obtained through abuse of trust and influence. This case illustrates how influence over a vulnerable person can vitiate consent, making the contract voidable. Question 7. Define consideration and explain with a landmark case and its facts. Consideration under Section 2D of Indian Contract Act 1872 is something done or promised at the desire of the promisor. It represents the value for which the other party's promise is exchanged. In Chinaya versus Ramaya, the plaintiff promised to pay the defendant if he took care of the plaintiff's son for some years. Although the son promised nothing, the court held consideration valid as it moved from a third party, that is the son's benefit. This case affirms that consideration may come from someone other than the promisee and is essential for a valid contract. Now question 8. Distinguish between void and voidable contracts. Void contract is defined under section 2G. An agreement not enforceable by law is called a void contract. It is invalid from the beginning and creates no legal rights or obligations. For example, an agreement with a minor is a void contract or for an illegal object. In both the cases, the contract will be void. Voidable contract, section 2I of the Indian Contract Act 1872, an agreement enforceable by law at the option of one party is called a voidable contract. It remains valid until the aggrieved party resigns it. Example, a contract made under coercion, fraud or undue influence. Leading case in Rani Annapurni versus Swaminath, the widow transferred property to her son influenced by her daughter-in-law's undue influence. The contract was voidable because consent was not free. Void contracts such as those with minors have no effect at any time, unlike voidable contracts which require action to be invalidated. Now question 9. Explain the legal position of minors agreement with a landmark case. Section 11 declares minors incompetent to contract, means minors cannot make a contract. So section 11 of Indian Contract Act 1872 declares that minors cannot make competent because that is they are incompetent for a contract. Leading case in this, in Mohori Bibi versus Damodar Das Bose, the plaintiff minor mortgaged property, but the contract was held void ab initio by the Privy Council. It was ruled that no contract with a minor is valid and such agreements cannot be ratified upon a telling majority. This case is a cornerstone in contract law, protecting minors from unforeseeable obligations. So this is all about the important questions from Indian Contract Act. So friends, do subscribe this channel. Thanks for watching.